Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Icon Cancer Centre's Facebook Live to answer your questions about the COVID-19 vaccination rollout, and in particular, to answer your questions of how COVID-19 vaccination applies to patients and relatives and carers of those with cancer. Ian Irving is my name, and I'm very proud to be Icon Group's Global Medical Director. I'm also a practicing haematologist at Icon Wesley, so I'm still very much in the coalface of cancer care and of COVID-19. With me tonight to answer your questions around COVID-19 vaccination and your cancer care is Dr. John Bashford. Now, Dr. Bashford will be very well known to most of you, I'm sure. Dr. Bashford was a long-standing haematologist-oncologist at the Wesley Hospital, Wesley Icon, instrumental in starting up bone marrow transplantation and stem cell transplantation in the private sector. And John is currently Icon's Director of Research and has been very much involved as a senior advisor in leading Icon Cancer Centre's response to the COVID-19 epidemic. So, John, very much welcome and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Ian.
Now, just for those of you who may not know, and I know this will be old hat to a lot of you, but just to give a very brief rundown on Icon Cancer Centre, we now operate over 30 cancer centres around Australia, operating in each Australian state. Our cancer centres offer radiation oncology therapy and in some centres, haematology and medical oncology care. Icon as a group has been now going for over 9 years and continues to expand around Australia and into Southeast Asia and China. Now, when the COVID-19 pandemic first reached Australian shores approximately 12 months ago, Icon had two goals. And those two goals were firstly to ensure the safety of our staff, the nurses, the doctors, the pharmacists, the administration staff, the radiation therapists who worked with us. And secondly, but equally as importantly, to ensure the safety for you, our patients, as well as acting with an abundance of caution so that extensive screening measures were undertaken to keep both staff and patients safe, was a desire to keep our cancer care going so that everyone who needed medical oncology, haematology and radiation therapy could continue to receive care through the pandemic. And I must say I'm very proud of all of our staff and very proud of you, our patients, who've helped us achieve those goals and get through the pandemic to the situation that we're now in when we look towards vaccination against COVID-19 as a way of restoring some of our freedoms and getting life as back to normal as we can. So we're going to run tonight's program very much as a question and answer session. John's going to provide the very much state-of-the-art expert commentary on COVID-19 vaccination as it applies to cancer care. And also in the second half of the hour-long session, we're going to answer your questions. So please, through the Facebook Live platform, put up your questions to John and myself, and we'll do our absolute best to answer your questions for you. So the first question I really want to ask you, John, first up, is, you know, we've heard a lot about COVID-19 vaccination on the lay media, and we've seen protests across the weekend. Are you yourself going to be volunteering for a COVID-19 vaccination?
Ian, I would have whatever vaccine is offered to me right now. I have no doubt about what vaccination brings to this crisis. As you said a year ago, We were very nervous about our ability to deliver cancer care. We've gotten ourselves through that. Our patients have not missed out on treatment. Here we are today, but the next step is vaccination, and I certainly would be very keen to line up for a vaccine straight away.
Right. No wavering. You've reviewed the evidence, no concerns.
Absolutely, and I know the severity of COVID-19. You know, people have talked about it as just being another flu. This is a serious, life-threatening disease. I've spoken to people, friends in Europe and the United States that have lost loved ones in their 30s, 40s, 50s, as well as that reserve of wisdom that sits in a society and people in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So this is real, and this has been an emergency. It remains an emergency, and a vaccine is a great step forward for us all.
No, thank you, John. I think what you say is really does ring true, doesn't it? And we all remember those pictures from New York and the United Kingdom and northern Italy in particular, and the havoc that COVID-19 can cause. John, the TGA now have approved 2 vaccinations against COVID-19. There is what's called the Pfizer vaccine, that is an RNA vaccine, and then there is the AstraZeneca/Oxford vaccine, that is an adenovirus-based vaccine. Do you want to just run through for our audience, please, the differences between the 2 vaccines and a brief overview of the trials that these 2 vaccines in particular went through to gain TGA approval?
I think the first thing you need to say is that vaccines, of course, have a long history in treating human disease certainly over the last few hundred years. But many of those vaccines are very simple techniques where you could inactivate a virus or a bacterial agent and inject it, and sometimes even mildly active forms. Coronaviruses are different. RNA viruses are distinct from the more common disorders. They're actually very primitive viruses in many ways, and it's difficult to actually mount a response with a vaccine. And so there's been, fortunately, since the SARS-1 breakout, there's been a big attempt to try and preemptively look at new strategies for these sort of organisms. So the 2 major ones are the so-called mRNA vaccines, which basically bring in messenger RNA, which is a form of our genetic code that allows proteins to be made, to bring that into our cells in a way that effectively mimics having an infection. The other way is the Oxford vaccine is to use a virus, in this case a chimpanzee virus, which can be inactivated in a way that stops it from growing, but allows it to bring that RNA message in, that viral message. And both of those are really innovative therapies, and so they are different. They each have particular problems. Companies have been working around this problem in different ways. That's what makes these endeavours successful. People are competing, but at the end of the day, the important thing is we have at least 10 years experience in them. So we have a good idea as to their safety and their effectiveness. So I think we're in a safe spot. It's not as though these have suddenly been manufactured over the last 12 months. They've been adapted over the last 12 months, but we do know how they work.
Mm-hmm. And John, both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine require 2 doses to be effective, is that correct?
Certainly there's a general principle, and of course we all know with tetanus vaccines and rubella and measles, mumps vaccines, that boosters are important, and that's, if you like, a reminder to the immune system that this is still a problem. And we know that often if you give one vaccine followed by another, you get an optimal immune response. So 2 is very important, and like all of us, I think all of us have trouble sometimes lining up. Second time around, we forget, life gets busy, we feel reassured by the first one. But the results are very striking while that first one has an impact, that second one really makes us safe.
So a real emphasis for everyone, but especially patients with cancer or who've had cancer before to make sure you have both vaccinations.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Now we hear a lot in the lay media about one vaccine being better than the other. We also hear a lot about other vaccines. There's a Novavax vaccine, a Moderna vaccine, Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I suppose just to reiterate for everyone watching that tonight we're really going to concentrate on talking about the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine, because these are the two vaccines that have been approved for use in Australia. And so rather than get sidetracked and talking about a vaccine that may never come to Australia or maybe many years away, I think we would do better to concentrate on the discussion around two vaccines that we do have. So just looking, those two vaccines, John, they have been developed in what is record time. It's really only 12 months ago when COVID-19 first hit our shores, and now we have vaccinations. Going back to smallpox or measles, it took almost hundreds of years to develop vaccinations against those illnesses. Has the process been rushed? Why has it been so quickly? And because it's been such a rapid rollout of vaccination around the world, what safeguards have been put in place, and what's your take on the safety of these vaccines?
Big questions, Ian, but important ones. I think the first thing to say is that there's that old saying, we stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us. And as I said earlier, there's been a long background of work to develop vaccines for coronaviruses and other RNA viruses. There's a long experience about how vaccines work, what the side effects are. So all of that allows us to move forward very quickly. We've been fortunate, though. It's quite possible that we may not have found a vaccine. Of course, we know that in HIV and we know that in malaria, we still don't have vaccines to those great World Health problems. But we've been fortunate here. We do have effective vaccines. They have been tested quickly, but they've been tested extensively. And we're fortunate here in Australia, of course, that we've been able to sit back a little bit because our public health measures have been very effective, and we can see what's happening overseas. And what we're seeing is not a picture of a vaccine that's somehow unusual or somehow has different side effects. It really very much has a similar side effect profile, and I think everyone's been confident that the regulatory authorities have been able to look at that information and feel confident that we can proceed. It's important to recognise, though, that there are many settings where diseases have occurred or new treatments have occurred, where groups like the TGA in Australia or the FDA in the United States have moved very quickly to get urgent treatment. So it's while it's not routine, it's not unusual to speed things through those regulatory processes where they're needed. There will, of course, and there is, of course, already, there will be in Australia a close follow-up of all people who are vaccinated to get a sense of the longer-term picture. But in terms of the safety, I think we're very much right on the information we've had from vaccines before.
So it's been a rapid progression to the point that we are now at, where we're rolling out vaccinations, but corners haven't been cut. It's been a worldwide effort, is I think what you're saying, and that we've stood on the shoulders of a lot of science and a lot of work that's been done over many decades, and people shouldn't equate the haste of the vaccine development with any reduction in standards or corner cutting.
And we've had some good fortune too, I think. I think we must say that we feel fortunate that we've got this opportunity.
Yes, we've been fortunate in Australia in so many ways. It's always very apposite to remember that. Just we have a question. I know we said we'd go to your questions a little bit later in the session, but we've just had a question come in from Lynn, specifically related to this question, and that is, for patients with cancer, is one vaccine better than the other?
So patients always ask the best questions, they ask the sharp questions, and look, this is something I think that we all have concerns about. We hear people expressing views in both the scientific press and the lay press, and obviously there's a lot of national tension between countries about who's got the best vaccine, etc. I think what's really important are what are the big questions, and the big questions are: do these vaccines reduce serious disease and loss of life from COVID-19? And I think when you look across all of the vaccines so far tested, and including the 2 in Australia, they are all highly effective. Not just a bit effective or reasonably effective, they're highly effective. Then when you drill down at the studies themselves, there are differences between studies, and it's hard to compare one agent to another unless there's been a direct comparison, and we face this often in medicine. As I said right at the beginning, I would be happy to have either vaccine that's now available in Australia, and indeed some of the others that are available around the world, because they have been shown to reduce serious illness needing hospitalisation and loss of life. And I think ultimately that's what counts. We do have this issue of reducing spread, and I know that's much talked about as well. We don't have a lot of information, but really it would be the first vaccine that is out there that is effective and does not reduce spread, if that were the case. I think we have a strong feeling that it will reduce it. By how much, and is there an advantage of one over the other? These are questions that only with the luxury of time we'll get answers to. But here today, they're both very active vaccines.
Mm-hmm. So despite maybe some of the questions that have been raised regarding the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, questions about the conduct of the trial, the actual results show that both vaccines are efficacious, and you wouldn't recommend to a patient who was offered an AstraZeneca vaccine now, you would certainly advise them to have that vaccination now rather than hold off for some time in the future with the hope of receiving a Pfizer vaccine.
That's right. It's worth noting too, I think, that if you look at the AstraZeneca study, if you're a pure scientist, you look at it and say, well, that's a bit messy, it's a bit hard to read, and it's been done in different places. And whereas the Pfizer vaccine is a very neat, tidy, clean study. But in a way, that's an advantage because the AstraZeneca vaccine is probably a more real-world example. So I think there are lots of reasons to say, look, we're confident that these are both effective vaccines.
Right. Excellent. Just to go back to one point you made earlier, John, around the AstraZeneca vaccine that involves a chimpanzee adenovirus. Now, if I've been reading the literature correctly, that chimpanzee adenovirus cannot replicate inside a human, and so won't actually cause an infection in those who receive the virus. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to know that in medicine there are all sorts of biological products that are used for treatment of disease that are grown in different cell lines, be they chickens or human cell lines, things that are made in the laboratory because cells are the right place to propagate them. What really matters is when you put it back as a treatment or as a vaccine, that it can't replicate, it can't grow and act like an active virus. Certainly in the case of this particular vaccine, the reason a chimpanzee is used so that you don't get an immune response against your own, something that is like self. So in that setting, it does not grow. It doesn't give an active human disease, but it certainly carries the important part, which is the coronavirus spike protein, the part of the genetic material that codes for that. So it very much replicates having coronavirus in terms of what your immune system sees.
Right. Excellent. No, thank you. And just also on the safety of both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine, of course, we know that in cancer therapy and with cancer patients, particularly patients who have hematological malignancy, leukemia, lymphoma, or those who've undergone stem cell transplants, that live vaccines can be contraindicated, and you don't want to to give live vaccines to patients, but I can absolutely say, and it's been emphasised in all the literature, that both the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccinations are not live attenuated vaccines, and so are safe and are not considered to be live attenuated vaccines. Now, the question of, we've touched on efficacy and safety. We've got a question come in from Amy that goes to the heart of side effects of having one of these COVID-19 vaccinations. And I'd put the question to you, John, in two parts. Firstly, if you could maybe just go over for cancer patients or people who've had cancer who receive one of these vaccinations, what sort of effects they could expect. And then secondly, Amy asked around some specific side effects with respect to enlarged lymph nodes, I think under the arm, and potentially a false signal to make it look like someone's actually been diagnosed or has developed a cancer.
Good question. Certainly, I think it's important to think when you talk about side effects, what are essentially an indication that the immune system's working. And that's really important because vaccines often cause local soreness, local redness, heat, sometimes a fever, occasionally shivers or shakes, but all of which is mild and which often respond to paracetamol or something similar. The importance of that is it's your immune system working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. And I think I get more concerned if I have a vaccine and get no reaction. So I think people need to be reassured that what's happening there is your body doing what it's supposed to do. And in doing so, it's setting off a whole chain of events that will enable you, when you face that particular disease, in this case COVID, that you'll have a normal immune response really very quickly. So that's the most common effect, and you hear people talking about a sore arm or redness in particular. The other question then, of course, is what are the unusual side effects? And we know some people with allergies are at risk of allergic responses, and there are particular settings where you need to take care, but they're really very uncommon. The issue of getting raised lymph nodes is an important one. You can get raised lymph nodes from a vaccine, and it's a sign, again, of the immune system responding. We know some people with diseases like chronic lymphocytic leukemia and lymphoma can get an increase in their lymph nodes when they have a local infection or a vaccine. That doesn't mean their lymphoma is progressing. It just means that they've already got large lymph nodes and in getting a response a bit bigger. So I wouldn't be perturbed about that, and certainly in a normal person who gets that response, that's a slightly more severe but normal side effect of a vaccine.
And with the passage of time or repeating an ultrasound or a mammogram, it should become obvious that the lymph node enlargement from the vaccine was just that and not suggestive of another.
If symptoms persist, see your doctor.
Yes. No, I don't actually know whoever came up with that marketing jingle, but it certainly withstood the test of time.
It's still good.
Yeah. It's still good. Now, we're having questions come in, and we had the same sort of questions when we did an Icon Cancer Centre staff Q&A around COVID-19 vaccination, and that is about the Australian rollout. We've seen some health professionals, some frontline nurses and health workers, along with others, to be vaccinated over the last few days. So vaccination has started in Australia now, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, the Australian government have produced, and we'll put these on our website, and they're certainly on the government websites, a vaccination rollout strategy, whereby both Australians with an underlying medical illness, which we imagine cancer would be, and for frontline health workers are in what's called stage 1B of the rollout, with stage 1A being for those frontline health workers in chest clinics, emergency departments, hotel quarantine, customs, nursing homes, etc. And then we go into stage or group 1B, which are the remainder of health professionals, frontline clinical workers, plus patients with a medical illness. John, are you aware of the time frame for when this will roll out to Group 1B that involves our patients? And secondly, is there any clarity around an actual definition of a younger Australian with an underlying health condition? And if you were treated for breast cancer 10 years ago, would you qualify? If you've got early stage chronic lymphocytic leukemia, would you qualify, etc.?
Look, I think first thing to say is you have to understand the magnitude of this task. It's a really big task getting a whole population vaccinated, or as many as possible. And we need that. We need as many as possible vaccinated. So it's a big task, and it does involve a whole supply chain. It involves government health departments at federal and state level, and then of course all the local participants, hospitals, GPs, pharmacists, etc. So it's a big undertaking. So there will be delays, there will be missteps, there will be questions that are not answered at this stage. And I think the 1B group is still not absolutely clear to us. I think as clinicians and I know, talking to my general practice colleagues, I think there's still a bit of uncertainty about what will qualify as being a significant medical condition, and I think that will become clearer over the coming weeks. The hope and plan of government is that by mid-March we will be starting those 1B vaccinations. I expect that we'll see that there'll be a much greater availability of vaccine, particularly from the AstraZeneca vaccine, because of local production with CSL. The lines will blur between 1B and the group beyond that. Supply is very important. The whole world is seeking these vaccines. There are bottlenecks occurring in Europe and the United States in terms of production. We're very fortunate that we're able to produce this one of the vaccines here. But I think everybody's working overtime to try and define that, and I think cancer patients will be very much at the top of that list. I think that's the important thing. You know, we'll ask questions about people who've had surgery 10 years ago for breast cancer, but and people who have asthma, mild asthma, etc. These are never going to be as strong as someone who's actively treated. And for our patients, for ICON patients who have been treated in the last year or are actively having treatment at the moment, they will be very much at the top of that list in terms of priority.
No, thank you, John. That's very useful, and that speed of the rollout. Of course, the vaccine has to be brought into the country. These vaccines actually take time to manufacture. It's been a tricky process. I mean, that time frame of vaccinating Australia over the next few months, you're comfortable with that time frame? I mean, we are in an excellent place with very, very little community transmission. John, does that reassure you that we have a bit of time?
Look, I think there are a number of aspects to that. Firstly, I heard somebody describe this as a bit like setting up your own home brewery when you set up a vaccination plant. You know, one batch may be different to another batch. It takes a while to get the systems right, and it's a biological system, so it's subject to many different aspects. And I know in Europe they've had trouble with some centres just not being able to produce in the way that they had hoped. So that takes time, and but of course, like all processes, it becomes streamlined. But that's why things have been delayed, and I think that will continue to some extent. I think more broadly, the time frame is really good for Australia because we are in an excellent situation. I was thinking this morning that even if you looked at the tough time that Victorians have had, and they've had a very tough time, the numbers of cases compared to countries like the UK, most of Europe and the United States are really very small. And so not only do we have the luxury of being able not to rush, we also have the luxury of watching what's happening overseas and perhaps avoiding some of the difficulties that have occurred and that are occurring there. So I think the time that's been set out, while I think we all feel, gee, we'd like to get on with it, has actually worked in our favour in many ways.
Yeah. No, excellent. The other question, and we've had come in from Jane, is around where she'll be able to have the vaccine delivered. Now, I'll just answer that very quickly. It's as John has said, it's still to be determined the exact time frame of the rollout as we go through 1A, 1B, and through the other groups. Generally speaking, ICON cancer centres do not administer vaccinations. It's envisaged that Group 1B and beyond will be vaccinated through community vaccination hubs, which could be public health centres, particular hospitals, general practice, and potentially into the future some pharmacies. So I can pretty much announce to everyone that certainly ICON will do everything we can to provide you with the information around COVID-19 vaccinations, but we are really not an organisation that delivers vaccines. That will be rolled out separately, as I've just alluded to.
There is, I think, an important aspect to that as well in terms of the two vaccines, and that you've got one which has to be stored under very strict conditions and very cold conditions, and so it's very hard for that to be given out in the community easily. It's suitable for big hospitals and stadiums like you see in the UK and the US, but it's not something that your local GP can easily deliver to you. So that's where the AstraZeneca vaccine is very strong, because it can be disseminated out to the community much more easily. So all of those things will have an impact upon which vaccine we get and how quickly we get it and where we get it.
Sure. No, thank you. We've got quite a few questions coming in that are excellent questions and relate to the intricacies of trying to deliver COVID-19 vaccinations to patients with cancer who are having treatment. So I'm just going to really put you through a few very, very technical questions, John, around vaccination and specific anti-cancer treatments. Firstly, we've had a question come in around monoclonal antibodies, in particularly MabThera, and another question relating to obinutuzumab being delivered for lymphoma that are very immunosuppressive, very depleting of B lymphocytes. Is someone receiving maintenance rituximab or maintenance obinutuzumab going to be able to mount an effective response to a COVID-19 vaccination? And should they have the vaccine, or should they wait until the completion of their therapy?
It's a complex question, Ian, and I think for those people who have not had lymphoma or don't know somebody who has lymphoma, it's important to recognise that lymphomas are malignancies, they're cancers of the immune system, and the most common type are B-cell lymphomas, and that's a cancer of the cells that actually make antibodies. So these people start with a difficulty right at the beginning, and that is that their immune systems don't work nearly as well as even other patients with more common cancers. Then we add the treatments that actually are effective both against the abnormal B cells, the cancerous B cells, but also have some impact on normal B cells. So their B cells are less able to mount a response. But remember that the immune system has two arms, the B cells and T cells, and they will still have active T cells. They will still mount a T cell response, and we know that T cell response is important in the effectiveness of vaccines. They may also get some B cell response. So I think the present answer is, look, it's completely reasonable and makes good sense to have those vaccines. We know that patients with lymphoma are more likely to get serious COVID if they don't have vaccines, and so even if it reduces the severity from severe to mild, then that's a very significant step forward. So the present advice right around the world, and there are advisory groups in Europe, the United States, and Britain already writing papers telling us what their experience is. And the experience is, yes, you would have those vaccines in that state, still recognising that you're immune suppressed and you would take the usual precautions.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And it is fair to say, John, that this is an area that is still being developed. There are guidelines still being developed regarding people on immunotherapy.
Yeah, and everyone's different. Patients are at different stages of treatment. They have different severities. So talking with your clinician is really important in this. And as you say, the evidence will evolve. But we know in influenza vaccines, for instance, we're always keen for people to continue to have those throughout treatment.
Just staying with a final question on immunotherapy. Of course, there are many different sorts of immunotherapy out there, and there are what's called the PD-1 inhibitors, nivolumab and Keytruda and ipilimumab, etc., just to name a couple of drugs. But this class of drug, PD-1 inhibitors, what can you say about patients who are on these treatments, which is often an ongoing treatment, again, for many months or years, these patients having a COVID-19 vaccination?
It's a question that had me running for the books in the weeks before this and other sessions, because my practical experience of those is not as great as some of my colleagues, and I think even then the experience has been all very recent. I think the important thing for people who don't know what these drugs are is that they're a way of switching on the immune system to fight cancer, and they're very effective, particularly in melanoma, but also in lung cancer and a whole variety of other cancers. So they're quite a revolution in new cancer therapies. One of the important principles is that the more active your cancer, the greater at risk you are of developing severe complications of COVID-19. And so it's important that you don't stop your immunotherapy because of concerns about the risk of vaccine. And now there's good experience from the United States initially, and now from Great Britain, showing that certainly there's no activation of COVID or worsening of COVID in patients who are on these. And if anything, perhaps they do better because of the positive effect of the drugs on the cancer and the cancer themselves. So I think all the evidence is good. It may be reasonable to not give them at the same time because people can get slight reactions to each, so you want to separate those out. But all other things being equal, it's recommended that you continue those treatments.
So you raise a very important point there, John. As a general principle, you wouldn't have the COVID-19 vaccination on the same day as your treatment?
No, I think that's right. One, there's a number of issues. There's if you have any sort of reaction to your treatment, you don't want it heightened by the vaccine, and vice versa. I think it's good just to help you understand what's going on, help your doctor understand what's happening day to day, just to separate them out. It makes it easier. Is it any more or less effective? Probably not, but I think it's good practice, and most people would recommend that.
And for those patients who are on cytotoxic chemotherapy, where they go through a cycle and into a period of neutropenia again, you'd probably not want to be vaccinated in the middle of the cycle when you're at your neutrophil nadir, and wish to try and wait and be vaccinated when your counts have recovered a little.
Yeah, look, I think that's again a general principle. I think we have a sense that it maybe matters less than we've thought in years past, but at the end of the day, it's good practice.
Sure. We've had a question come in that from Paul that I might just answer regarding, because both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine require 2 doses a few weeks apart, does the second vaccine need to be the same, in inverted commas, brand as the first vaccine? And I think it absolutely is recommended that the second dose of the vaccine is the same vaccine that you received the first time. These are actually, as John's explained, in great detail, these are different vaccines. They're not the same vaccine that is just branded differently. They are separate vaccines that have come about through different technologies. So you definitely do need the second dose, the same type of vaccine as the first.
There's uncertainty already in scheduling and dosing. I think you don't want to put a whole new sense of uncertainty into the mix. I think we try and stick with what we know at this point.
Yes. Now we've had another question come in actually from a couple of different people. So so everyone putting in questions, thank you. But this question comes in from a patient aged 68 years, and she poses very important question about having the vaccine if you're older. And I guess with a particular view to, is it safe for older Australians to receive these vaccines, particularly in view of some of the reports coming out of Norway, where there was excess deaths reported one weekend that really did heighten our awareness. And secondly, will older patients, in this case our 68-year-old lady, will they mount an effective immune response to a COVID-19 vaccination?
Look, I think increasingly, certainly in cancer medicine, we recognise the concept, and I think it's more broadly that the number of years you have is not the same as how old your body may behave. So I think that's the first thing. And there will be people in their 90s who immunological systems will be sound and they'll be fit and strong and able to mount the immune response that somebody else who's 50 who has a chronic disease. So I think age is a really artificial construct. And I was concerned when we saw some EU countries coming out and saying, look, the AstraZeneca vaccine, we're not going to give it to people over 60. And because the early trials didn't include a lot of people in those age groups. And we know from other drugs, and we've got some great examples in cancer medicine where people have tried to build artificial walls around age, and it's just not the case. I think people don't suddenly change when they get to a particular age point. What really matters in terms of your ability to mount an immune response is how healthy you are. We also know that COVID is much more of a risk in people over the age of 70, and as colleagues of mine in public health would say, in that age group of 65 and beyond, and particularly in the over 70s, resides a whole lot of wisdom, experience, and also desire to help younger generations. And I think we don't want to lose that just because of a concern about older people it not being as effective. So I'd make that point first of all quite strongly. I think the second point around the safety in Norway was really a false signal because they went into settings where people were at high risk of dying already from other causes quite quickly, and because they wanted to get into care homes and protect people quickly, and that information's been looked at very carefully. And there's again nothing to suggest that there's a greater risk in the older population of significant side effects. So I would reassure you. The other thing I'd say, of course, looking from the perspective that I increasingly look from, is that 68 is not at all old. So I wouldn't be perturbed.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've had some other questions just going on from that, and around patients who may be entering palliative care and towards end-of-life care. Is that a group potentially you would be less inclined to vaccinate, John? And how would you approach the decision-making in those of us who would be entering that stage of our cancer journey?
Yeah, that's a fine question. I think I think in the palliative care setting, every decision about every medication is one of circumstance, and there are some settings where I think people would be very clear in their mind that they don't want to be vaccinated. There are others where people may have a goal in mind some months down the track. I think that's less of a concern in Australia, but I think if you're in a high COVID area and you had a limited lifespan, but a wedding you wanted to get to, or the birth of a child, then you may choose to be vaccinated. So I think that there's a very personal aspect to that sort of decision-making process. But it's an important question. I'm sure it'll be asked many times around the world.
Sure. Yes, no, you're right. It's very much, I mean, what we're talking about tonight, of course, are generalities, and for specific medical advice, it's absolutely vital to talk to your own treating cancer physician and your family physician, and these decisions that need to be individualised. And what we're doing, of course, is giving general advice. So very important to emphasise that again. Let's just change gears over to, we have a few questions, including from Cheryl, around the COVID-19 vaccination and radiation therapy. And I suppose I'd preface this question to you, John, of course, that just like all chemotherapy is not the same, and there are many different types of regimens, all radiotherapy, of course, is not the same, and there is some radiation therapy that is very targeted, where you may be honing in on a small part of the body, like a prostate, and then there'll be other larger radiation fields irradiating lots of lymph nodes, where there may be immune effects or abscopal effects. So having that sort of put aside, can you maybe comment on the safety and the desire to have a COVID-19 vaccination whilst you're undergoing a course of radiation therapy that often goes over 6 to 8 weeks?
I think the first question, of course, Cheryl, is what are you having radiotherapy for? Because that has a big impact upon how you might approach this question. In general, radiotherapy would not be a reason not to be vaccinated. I think because somebody's having radiotherapy means they're coming into clinics, they're in contact with people all the time, they have a risk themselves if COVID is in the community. They have a risk also of bringing COVID in to a clinic. So I think there are lots of reasons why you continue vaccination absolutely normally. As Ian said, there are very specific settings where that advice may be different. But I would imagine for most settings with radiotherapy, you would say that you would not delay radiotherapy if you're having. You would not delay vaccination if you're offered it, and if you were to delay it, it would only be for a short period.
Right. Excellent. Thanks, John. With what about, and Cindy, both Cindy and Eileen ask a very similar question related to targeted therapies. So Cindy asked particularly around chronic myeloid leukemia that are on targeted therapy with tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and Eileen asked about targeted therapy in general. Are patients taking these sorts of treatments that are often oral medications? Should they be getting vaccinated?
Yeah, for a start, I think the important thing is to say, look, you're almost certainly going to be in that 1B group because you've got a significant medical illness. You're requiring long-term therapy that has an impact upon how your body works. The recommendations from both the American and European societies of oncology both are that targeted therapy should continue and that it's not a reason not to be vaccinated. And in fact, again, because of the underlying condition that you're treating, it's a very strong reason to be vaccinated. But I would certainly reassure you both that it's a reasonable thing to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We have some questions coming in, and I know that from my medical practice, a lot of people have been asking me this. Once we have COVID-19 vaccination underway and we've got a good percentage of the population vaccinated, will society go back to normal, John? Can we do away with some of these restrictive social distancing type measures that we're all partaking in at the moment?
I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were before. I think an event like this has an impact upon how we see the world, and I think this will have an impact, and probably a good impact in a number of ways. I think the first part of the question, though, that most of us ask is, does it mean if I've had a vaccine, I don't need to do all of those things? or does it mean as a community we go back to where we were? I think the answer is things will happen slowly. Vaccines don't suddenly reduce the risk of getting COVID or spreading COVID. We do know that in Israel and the United Kingdom that there's a strong view that we are seeing reductions in spread already because of vaccinations, particularly in Israel. But the measures of social distancing, social hygiene, wearing masks where it's appropriate, I think will remain in place for some time, and we really want to see high vaccination levels. And I think it's very clear, to use that old saying or modify it, that no human is an island, and we all are intercommunicating. And I think it's important that we regard each other with the same care that we regard ourselves. And that is going to mean that there will be people who can't have vaccines. There are people who perhaps the vaccines haven't worked as well, and we have to care for them in the way we'd like to be cared for, which means social distancing, social hygiene. I think we'll find that in 5 years' time, our community will be a lot more aware of the spread of viral illnesses than I think we had become. And many of the habits of our grandparents, the things that they tried to teach us will come back, and people will be more careful. So I think in some ways that's a good effect, because we've been lulled into a false sense of security. We've had a whole, probably 2 or 3 generations of people that have missed out on major infectious diseases the way that they existed up until the turn of the last century. So I think they're important messages for us all.
The return of hygiene messages that, as you say, our grandmother used to preach about, and hand washing and covering your mouth when you sneeze and cough, and staying away from others when you have a respiratory infection. They're proving incredibly useful bits of information now.
I think that's right. That whole not coming to work when you've got an active infection is a really important piece that will come back into focus.
Yeah. And on that point, John, about the workplace, I mean, incredibly important that at Icon Cancer Centres or any health facility around the country, both public and private, at the moment. I mean, certainly all of you would have seen the screening measures and the care in which Icon has taken to absolutely put as a priority keeping all the patients who come for anti-cancer treatment to be as safe as possible. To that end, Icon staff as health workers should receive the vaccination in Group 1B, and it's envisaged that there'll be a very high take-up rate of the COVID-19 vaccination amongst our staff. We've had numerous education sessions already. We've had staff forums where we've answered questions, and in general, our staff have a very high take-up rate of vaccination against diseases like influenza, etc. So it is envisaged that within Icon Cancer Centres, we will, as John says, still be adhering to some social distancing policy. The screening and the vigilance will still be there to keep you safe. And it's absolutely a mantra among staff that even though vaccination rates of our staff may be high, they won't be 100%. And so that actual mantra of making sure staff don't attend work when they have a respiratory tract infection to ensure they have a COVID-19 test when needed will certainly be part of Icon's policy going forward to keep all of you safe, because as John's mentioned, it's extremely important. But you can have confidence that even if not 100% of your staff caring for you are vaccinated for whatever reason, that the staff caring for you are well, and you will not be catching COVID-19. Now, we're really at the last few questions. We've had a great number of questions put in from audience members. If I haven't got to your question, I apologise. There's only a limited time, but of course we will have a transcript of questions that have been asked, put on the website. And so for the questions that you've asked tonight, but we haven't answered and I haven't had a chance to put to John, we certainly will be putting up a transcript for you. And in particular, there are some very specific questions that you've put around your own illness and situation with treatment. And as John has said, cancer therapy is individualised these days, so some of these decisions around COVID-19 vaccination and the timing with your immunotherapy and radiation therapy very much need to be discussed with your treating clinician. Now, John, can I just ask about, you'd mentioned around side effects and around the immune response that we get with COVID vaccination. Apart from the immunosuppression and cancer treatment, are there some situations where really you shouldn't have the COVID-19 vaccinations, concerns around maybe bone marrow transplantation or severe allergies? Who should really avoid it?
Yeah, look, I think people who have bone marrow transplants from donors, so allogeneic bone marrow transplants, a very specific group. It's a small number, but it's a very important number because they're having intensive therapy and hopefully curative therapy. They are at a particularly vulnerable phase for up to 3 months after, and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But that it needs to be individualised in their setting because there are concerns that it may set off complex side effects that can be difficult to manage. So that's really very important. Severe allergies, people who carry EpiPens for various types of reactions to things like food and indeed some vaccinations. These are people who have to take great care. I think again, individualisation is very important. You would hope that there are very few settings where people cannot have vaccines at all, and the different vaccine technologies probably will make it possible. But in those people, if they have to receive vaccines, they have to be in settings where resuscitations can be carried out quickly if it were necessary. So great care in those settings. The important thing is those settings are infrequent, and by enlarging the herd immunity, by most of us having vaccines, we actually take the risk away for those few who can't have them. And we saw this with smallpox and similar things in years past, where there were those people who couldn't have vaccines, but the world was made safe for them by everybody around them having them.
Excellent. No, excellent. Thank you. Can I just ask, we've had a question come in around patients on clinical trials. Thank you for those couple of questions.
In my heart, yes.
Yes, well, being on a clinical trial won't exclude you from having COVID-19 vaccination, would it, John?
No, I think you need a particular pat on the back for a start for being on a clinical trial, and we would not deny you a vaccine. There's absolutely no reason why a person on a clinical trial cannot have an appropriate COVID vaccine. It's been important to note that many clinical trials have gone forward through this difficult period. We owe the results of all the vaccination technology to people who have agreed to be on clinical trials. So they are a very special group that deserve mention in this setting. But if you're on a clinical trial, you get the same treatment as everybody in this situation.
Excellent. Quick question to finish. Flu vaccination and COVID-19 vaccination in the one day, get it all over and done with?
Oh, look, I think it's better to separate them. Again, that whole principle of trying to understand which response is which. I think most people would choose to have vaccines on different days. It's important still to have the flu vaccine. Flu is still a serious disease. The complications are probably a 20th of those from COVID in terms of frequency, but they still occur, and flu vaccines are important, and we're going into flu season later this year. Of course, with social distancing, we don't tend to spread it as much. We found that last year, so we've learned something about how not to get influenza even without vaccines. But it is important going forward for us to continue to have those.
That's a very good message. Although it might be tempting to have them both on the same day, it's not recommended around the world by any.
Two sore arms is not a good thing.
Now, final question of the evening from Helen, and And it's a very thorny question. It certainly made me think. And Helen is asking if you've been vaccinated against COVID-19, particularly if you're a healthcare worker, could you still be a carrier and asymptomatically spreading the virus?
So, Helen, this is the big money question, I think, in understanding what vaccines can do at the moment. We don't know the answer fully. I alluded to earlier in passing that it is unusual for a vaccine to be effective against a respiratory virus and not reduce the spread. So we expect the same thing to be the case with these vaccines, but we just don't have the proof. Giving a vaccine and studying whether it prevents getting the full-blown disease is much easier than doing a trial where you have to test everybody to see whether they've got vaccine in their respiratory tract and then whether they spread it to others. So they're really complicated questions in the field to answer. We don't have them. We do have some indications, and they're pretty encouraging at this moment, Ian, but I think you've asked the question that we all would like to know the answer to, Helen, so thank you.
As we would very much like to be, we'd all like to be over the other side and in a post-COVID world. So, look, thank you, Helen, but thank you to everyone who's asked questions tonight. That's we're now 6 o'clock, so I'll conclude. Once again, reminding everyone that a recording of tonight will be on our Icon Facebook site. We have question and answer transcripts on our website too that will be regularly updated as information comes to hand, because what we're seeing is information come to us in real time. We are literally living through this pandemic, and it's not just that we have all the answers today. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you also for entrusting us at Icon Cancer Centre to be your partner in battling cancer. Our goal is personalised cancer care to treat as many patients as possible, as close to home as possible. So thank you for entrusting us to be your partner on what is sometimes a difficult journey, but certainly is improving all the time. So I wish everyone a wonderful evening. John, thanks again for joining us.
Always good to be here to assist.
Yes, it's a lot harder to answer the questions and ask them sometimes, so really appreciate your time, John. And of course, thanks to our Icon staff who've made this evening possible. So good evening, and we hope to see you again at our next Facebook Live event.